Hopefully my mic doesn't die. What could have fixed school spirit? Now, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. Like, since the moment I saw the show, I've wanted to talk about it because the ending was less than desirable. The biggest plot hole for this show was the ending. It never made sense. It was never talked about. It was never even discussed really as a possibility. But let me start at the beginning. So School Spirits follows our main character, Maddie, who is played by Peyton List, who has somehow magically ended up dead, allegedly, in the spirit realm. And in the spirit world, she has encounters with other people who have died at the school that she's attending. Those characters include Wally, played by Milo Manheim, Rhonda, played by Sarah Yarkin, Charlie, played by Nick Pugliese. I do apologize. Dr. Martin, played by Josh Zuckerman, and Dawn, played by Rayanne Boone. Maddie has somehow ended up dead in the spirit realm, and she is with Charlie pretty much since the beginning of the series. Charlie is also dead. He died in the 90s. You'll see that a lot of the characters died in different decades, and their like costumes kind of resemble that, but none of their mannerisms really do. The character Rhonda died in the 50s, I do believe, and while some of her costuming feels like it's from the 50s, a majority of it does not. She also doesn't portray herself as a woman who lived in the 50s. She is more kind of angry and low key feminist, which is fine, just not something you would expect from a character from that generation, but that's a small nitpick compared to what I'm about to go over. Maddie has a real life friend from the living world named Simon. Simon is played by Christian Ventura, and they were pretty much inseparable as kids. We never really see them before Maddie ends up dead. We see flashbacks occasionally, but for the most part, the flashbacks are just to piece together Maddie's memory because she doesn't remember how she died or how she ended up in the spirit world. I think the biggest plot hole in this entire series could have been fixed with Simon. Simon is the only character who can see Maddie. He can't see any of the other dead characters, which should have tipped us off to the fact that maybe Maddie isn't actually dead. He can only see Maddie. Maddie can only communicate with him. So they are the only two that can talk to each other, despite that Maddie is supposedly dead and no one else can communicate with anyone else. I find this strange because the reason that Simon can talk to Maddie is because he missed her so much, and there are ley lines in the school, and whenever they are on one of those ley lines, they can communicate. That would make sense only if Simon's character was able to talk to spirits all the time anyway, but he's not. Somehow, because of plot convenience, he is able to talk to Maddie. And that's how they solve the mystery of how she ended up there to begin with, was because they are able to communicate. I think you would have been able to do this cool with any sort of plot like this. Like maybe she was only able to talk to him if they were looking in a mirror or through a window at each other, and that's how they were able to communicate. But they will sit side by side talking face to face, and people just think he's crazy. I think it would have been cool to have a different dynamic, but this isn't about creating a new narrative. This is about using the narrative that they've already had and changing it to make it make sense. I really enjoyed the series. I binged it, but I think making Simon someone who is spiritual to begin with would have helped communicate better why he is able to talk to Maddie. If he was wearing like evil eyes or all seeing eyes and carrying salt and using crystals and was already spiritual in that way, I think it would have made a lot more sense why he's able to talk to Maddie. And I think we would have been able to fix the plot hole at the very end with the same method. I think if Simon as a character was very spiritual and his grandmother was like a seancer and talked to spirits for a living, say his grandmother lived in like New Orleans and had a business talking to the dead for people who wanted to speak to their relatives the last time, and he had sort of like a background in spirituality. I think if he's someone that practiced being like a spiritual medium all the time, that would have made more sense for him to be able to talk to Maddie while she was in the spirit world. The other thing is that the very end of the series, the biggest plot hole was that Maddie didn't actually die. Her body was inhabited by a different spirit, and so her soul was forced out. That's how she ended up in the spirit world to begin with. That's the reason that they couldn't find her body, was that because her body is walking around, just somebody else's soul is in her body. And I think the reason that would make sense, because this hasn't happened to anybody else. This is like a one-off situation, which A, doesn't make sense. But B, I think if Simon was in the business of being a spiritual medium, and the fact that he wears like all of this protective stuff to keep him safe because he knows the dangers of like the spirits and the spirit realm, he could have given Maddie some sort of like protective charm or ward that she wears on a necklace. Now, she has a necklace from her dad, and in the actual show, I do believe Maddie's mom rips off that necklace. And if you were to have that protective charm from spirits on that same necklace, when Maddie's mom rips it off, then Maddie would be exposed to the spirits, and that's how Janet could inhabit Maddie's body. I think Simon could have given her that symbol, either an evil eye or something else, because he knows that because she's so emotionally vulnerable, that it would be easy for spirits to come and attack her because of just her lot in life and stuff like that. And so he gave it to her for her protection. So when her mom rips it off, because she's in an emotionally vulnerable state, Janet can then come in and take over her body and force out Maddie's soul, and that's how we get to where we are today. I think another thing is that they sort of sprinkled Janet in throughout the series, and they're like, oh, Janet's passed on, because it's not really like the school is a purgatory necessarily. It's not like they're paying for any crimes. They just are so attached to the real world still and their pasts that they have remained at the school. And so Janet gets sprinkled in, and they're like, oh, Janet's passed on, Janet's passed on. But no one else in their time there, no one else in like Rhonda's time. Rhonda's been there for like maybe 50, 60, 70 years at the point. No one else has passed on, allegedly. And so the fact that they're like, oh, Janet passed on, she didn't even say bye, blah, blah, blah. I think it would have been interesting for Rhonda to be like, yeah, Janet passed on, but it was a lot calmer than so and so who passed on like 20 years ago. Because Rhonda was kind of the first character that understood that Mr. Martin, their spiritual like guide, wasn't a good guy. And so for Rhonda to be like, yeah, Janet passed on, but it wasn't as calm as so and so who passed on, because then Dawn also passes on, and like the entire like building kind of shakes and the lights flicker and they're all like, what is happening? So Rhonda being like, yeah, it was a lot calmer than I expected considering so and so. And that would have also been foreshadowing to the fact that Janet took over Maddie's body. The other complaint I had was that this show, every single episode was very repetitive. Like, there would be one person who they thought killed Maddie or harmed Maddie or had some sort of something to do with the fact that Maddie is now dead. They would have one suspect, and then by the end of the episode, they would no longer be a suspect. No one really remained a suspect longer than their 40-50 minute episode, which is fine. There just wasn't any drawn out suspense. Every single episode was the same. Someone's a suspect. Something proves that they didn't do it. No longer a suspect. We get one more piece of what could have happened to Maddie. And I think the way we could have fixed that was to have someone be a long-term suspect. Everyone kind of assumes that her mom did it. And her mom did have a hand in it. It just wasn't in the way that everyone expected. But no one was really a long-term suspect. Xavier, played by Spencer McPherson, was a suspect at one point. Sandra, Maddie's mom, played by Maria Dizia, was a suspect. Claire, played by Rainbow Weddle, was a suspect at one point. Nicole, played by Kira Pichardo, was a suspect. And then Mr. Anderson, played by Patrick Gilmore, was a suspect. And they were all suspects in their own respective episodes, but none of them stayed suspects longer than that, except for Mr. Anderson, who was a suspect for maybe 2 episodes, but not any longer than that. So it was really hard to sort of feel like there was any sort of stakes for this, because a lot of it was just mundane Maddie walking around trying to figure out what to do with herself because she can't interact with anyone, and everyone else who is in the spirit world has been here for so long and has like figured out just kind of how to live, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and just she wants to figure out why she's here, but she can't remember anything, conveniently. It was very stagnant at some points, but not stagnant enough for me to give up watching it. I do know that there's a season 2 coming out, and at the end of season 1, we did see Janet in Maddie's body leaving the state. This takes place in Wisconsin somewhere. That's fine. I think it would have made more sense in some place like New Orleans, but that's very cliche, and so having it in Wisconsin is cool. I think there should have been more explanation to why there are so many ley lines in the school to begin with. I mean, obviously you don't want it to be like some Native American burial ground, because that's A, disrespectful, and B, very cliche. But I feel like there should have been more explanation about something. Be like, there was a cult here back when the Pilgrims came, like all these years ago, and they just, I don't know, opened up portals for the devil or something. Like, give us more, because the poster of the show, which I should have up here, and if I don't, whatever, I'll have it up here now. It has like Maddie sitting in all these candles. We don't really see that. I thought this was going to be more of like a spiritually ambitious, adventurous type of show, but we don't really see them doing any sort of seances except for once. And it isn't the real, like, the living people doing the seance. It's the people in the spirit world doing the seance. It's Maddie and all of them doing the seance, trying to help Dawn recover her memories. Yes, it came into play, but it didn't come into play the way I expected, or the way that probably would have helped wrap up all the loose threads. That being said, the acting in this was really good. I did like it. I liked the set designs. Everything was very practical. It was a small set. It felt very low budget, which I assume it probably was. You can watch this on Netflix. I think Peyton List was a producer on this as well, so she had a hand in not only acting, but I think the creation of it, which is super cool, and I'm glad that she is able to do that. But I feel like there could have been a little bit more. Like, there could have been more within the writing to help explain how all of this happened. And I probably won't know if all of this gets explained until the next season comes out, because it's coming out. It's not out yet, and I haven't seen it, but right now your first season should have been wrapped up within your first season. And if it wasn't, it should have been explained enough to where if you didn't happen to get a second season, and if you don't happen to get a third season, you're going to be left with all these plot holes and with a loose end of your story. If you are going to have seasons of something, you need to finish it up unless you are guaranteed a next season, and then you can stretch it out. But to not have everything wrapped up is not only dangerous for like production wise, but it also just doesn't make sense. That being said, that's how I would have written this show, is to make Simon a spiritual medium. That way it's explained why he can talk to Maddie, and it's explained kind of more how this stuff happens. I think it would have helped a lot, especially with the final plot twist where Maddie isn't actually dead and it's just their souls have been displaced. I think that would have been explained a lot, and I think you could have maybe hinted to that, like Simon being like, I don't know how I can see you, but it's different. It's almost like you're still here. But I think this one simple change of a character would have helped kind kind of tie everything together and made more sense. I'm glad my microphone decided to die after I had finished talking about everything, but that's all I have to say about this. I'm sure I could ramble on forever, but I'm gonna have to do a bunch of cutting on this video anyway because I hate listening to myself ramble. So that was my suggestion for this show. I'll probably make more videos like this because there's a lot of shows that I watch that I would love to have seen done differently, just simply for like the context and the overarching like plot and whatnot. But if you have seen this show, let me know what you think should have been changed to make it make more sense. Let me know if you agree with my idea at all, because I think I'm pretty smart. I think that this idea is great. Other than that, thank you so much for watching and letting me ramble to you, and I will see you guys later. Bye!